In this video, I want to take a look at what's generally referred to as the Born technique, B-O-R-N. It stands for Base Orphan Reference Node, Born technique. And the foundation of the Born technique is to use only the origin planes and the origin center point for your sketches, if possible. Sometimes it isn't practical or isn't possible, but as much as is practical or possible, use only the origin planes for your sketches. That way, if something changes, your model will be more robust. It will be less likely to fail. Before I start analyzing this existing part, let's change the color of it to make it a little bit easier to see on the screen. And I think turquoise is an easy one to see on the screen. So when I look at this thing, a few things pop out at me right away. I would expect to see a fillet coming across here, and I would certainly expect to see a fillet on this edge. So this fillet come up and continue to get rid of that sharp corner right there. In the same way on the other side, I would expect to see a fillet so that it looks more like this up on the top side. And and then I would expect to see a fillet, coming along this edge and coming along that edge as well. Those are just things that pop right out to me. And then when I start analyzing a file, the first thing I like to do is turn on the visibility of the origin center point and see if it was located in a logical location. Now I can't tell. It looks like maybe that was put in the midpoint location of this surface, but I'm not sure if it was or wasn't. That may or may not be. Actually, I'm kind of curious now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the end of part marker up. I want to get before there were any holes in here, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to tell it to put a point at the center of that loop. And so I'm going to put another point on here, and I'll select that. And I see actually it isn't even in the center of this base. And so I would say that location of a origin or datum is really the most important or first thing you should consider when modeling a part. Now, I spent 8 years out on the shop floor working on machines, and if you've ever run a Bridgeport milling machine or some milling machine, the first thing you do is you set up a datum, and your table would be one datum, or some parallels or a vice would be the datum that you might put on the bottom of this thing. You would have the side of the vice that doesn't move, this set jaw, as another datum, and then maybe a stop or something as a third datum. But you set up datums. Now we can cheat a little bit on that in Inventor, where we put our datum, but we should do some consideration of where we would put our datum, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And so I started to examine the features, and I see a work plane here, and I seldom ever create any work planes. I may once in a while create a work plane, but very few work planes. Probably not. Well, anyways, I'm going to edit this sketch because I see that there's no push pin or thumbtack on that sketch, and I edit that sketch, and I see down here it says 3 dimensions needed, and by the color of it and by the fact that there's no push pin, I can tell that this is not fully defined. And in fact, if I start grabbing geometry, I see that it's missing a tangent there, it's missing a vertical constraint here, it could be missing, it's not connected down here. So think of this as back on the when I started out on the Bridgeport on a milling machine. So on the milling machine, the first thing I do is I set up 3 datums, and part of the reason I do that is then I can remove the part from the machine and take some measurements, and then if I need to make additional cuts, I can put it back into the machine exactly where it was before, and I can make those cuts with confidence that I'm going to not scrap the part. And so this kind of runs along the same lines. If you don't fully define your your sketch, somebody could easily come along and drag that, or you could accidentally drag it yourself and then cause all kinds of problems with your geometry. And so that's just one sketch that isn't fully constrained. If I'm guessing if I see one, I see more work planes. So already we have 3 work planes here, and here's another sketch that's not fully defined. If I go down, here's another sketch not fully defined, another work plane. Going down here, so another sketch that's not fully defined. I mean, just almost every sketch is left underdefined, and that's just really poor modeling practice. So let's look at how I might model this part. The first thing I have to decide is, and this goes back to, I started out on the drawing board back in the last century. And back in the last century, when we go to lay out the views on a sheet of paper, you had to give a little bit of thought to what you were going to do before you even started. Because if you started out wrong, you can imagine on a sheet of paper, eraser was not a very efficient way of correcting mistakes. So you wanted to try to avoid mistakes. But anyways, so one of the things on the drawing board is you would look at or think about, what view shows the most detail of your object, and the front view is a pretty good view, or this view would be a pretty good view for showing the most detail. And even as I look at this, I start to think about, a different way that I might have modeled this than what I'm going to show you. So I've already come up with one way which I'm going to show you, and I'm even thinking maybe I should have changed that and do it from this view. So there isn't just one right way, there's multiple right ways, but I try to find a view that really shows a lot of the details, and I'm going to do it from this view. And so let me restore down this, and I have a new file that I've started, and let's put these side by side here so that we can look at this and see how we're going to do this. The next thing to do is to look at the geometry and try to break it down into basic bits. And so I see one of my basic bits I see is a cylinder here. I see a cylinder here. I see part of a cylinder here. I see a box here, a box here, a box there, the height of the overall box, and then a bunch of cylinders. So I see several boxes and cylinders. Think about that. I can break this down into only several boxes and cylinders. And then if you've ever run a lathe, you know that you can break down a cylinder into rectangle. In fact, all of these boxes can be broken down to a rectangle. So really everything here could be done with only rectangles. Now I'm probably going to use some other tools other than rectangles, but all of the geometry on this particular part, except for these fillets, all the rest of the geometry could be done with rectangles, simple 2D rectangles. So I'm thinking about, back on the drawing board days, back in the last century. All right, so I'm going to go to I'm on the right side view of this. I'm going to go to the right side view and start modeling. And so I want to pick a location for the origin, so I turn on the center point. Now on my milling machine, it makes sense for me to have the origin right here. Now sometimes they'll cheat in Inventor just because there's efficiencies to be gained from putting the origin in another location. I might put the origin up here in the center of this circle right here, but in this case I'm going to put it in this corner right here. Now I recommend when you are modeling in whatever CAD program that you create one line or one rectangle or one circle or one piece of geometry and dimension it immediately. And so I'm going to create a line, and I'm going to go from the origin, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to dimension this line immediately to give me a sense of scale for the rest of my sketch. And so that distance is going to be 2 and 11/16. And so I'll put in 2 11/16. Now I'm going to draw a, and so I've got this line right here. I'm going to draw the line coming up, over, down, and so forth. And so I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to go up from this point, and I'm going to come over about like that. I'm going to come down about like that. I'll come over about like that, and I'll come over about like that. Or I could have drawn 2 rectangles. In fact, in Inventor 2020, I'm using Inventor 2019 to demonstrate this. But in Inventor 2020, the way that it selects profiles has been dramatically improved, the enclosed area here. And I might just do it as 2 rectangles in 2020. But I'll go ahead and put some more dimensions on here. Don't go too far along before you put your dimensions on. You don't want it to get too complicated. And so I'm going to dimension from here to here, and that's 0.75. And I'm going to dimension this as 0.625. And I'm going to dimension the distance from here up to here, and that distance I'm going to, and actually, I don't really know what that distance is, so I'm going to undo that. Remember, I said I was thinking about maybe putting a datum, or putting the origin right in the center of this. That's because we generally, when we design a part or a machine, we dimension to critical location. So critical location is from the bottom of this part up to the center of this hole. And then this would probably be, cast surface, rough surface. This would be a machine surface, cast surface. And so, put the dimensions to the machine surfaces. So I'm going to put a point up here about where that circle is going to be, that cylindrical piece. Now be careful you don't click on the midpoint unless that's where it's at. I don't know that it's at that midpoint, so I'm going to click about right here. And then I'm going to dimension from this up to that point, and 3 inches, so the top of that cylinder will be, or the center of the cylinder will be at 3 inches. And then I'm going to dimension from this point up to the top of the part, and that will be 2 15/16. Alright, so now I have the basic shape of the part. I have it begun, and it might be advisable to just keep the sketches simple and just to finish this sketch and go on and do the next sketch. But I'm going to add a little bit more geometry to this one, so I'm going to do a rectangle, and we'll see why here in a few minutes. I'm going to do a rectangle about like this, and then I'm going to put another rectangle out here in space. And here's what I'm looking. I'm looking at this rib right here. So I have a rib right there, and I have a rib right here, and those are rectangular in shape. So I'm going to draw a line from this point over to straight over perpendicular, and I'm going to right click and change this to a construction line. And because that's the center of this cylinder, in order to remind me as I go, I'm going to change that to a construction center line. So that's a center line, will be the center of this cylinder. And then I'm going to do a coincident constraint between the midpoint of this rectangle and that point, and then I'll do a coincident constraint between this point and this line, not the midpoint of this line, not the end of it, just somewhere on that line. And then I'll put a couple more dimensions on here. So I'm going to dimension. So remember, this is a datum and this is a datum. So I'll dimension from this datum over to this edge, and that's 1.125. And then the distance from here to this datum back here, and that is 1.625. And then I want to dimension, I have this rib that goes from here to here. I want to dimension the height of that rib as 1 inch. I'll finish the sketch, and I'm going to save this. Save often. There's no excuse for losing your work. Every time you do something right, save it. And in order to clear up clutter on the screen, I'm going to turn off the dimension visibility of that first sketch. So this L shape is this shape. This rectangular shape is this rib right here. This rectangular shape is this rib right here. And then I'm going to continue on along those lines. So I'm going to start, and this is kind of like being on the drawing board back in the last century, you know, where we laid things out with a pencil on a sheet of paper in 2D. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. And so I'm going to start a new sketch. I'm going to project geometry. This point right here, remember this is that center line, the center of this hole. I'm going to project that point into my new sketch. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle from this point, and I'm going to bring that rectangle up. Actually, let's bring it up about like this. And I was trying to decide where I want to let go of that. And now I actually want this point to be connected up here at the top, so I need to project that point as well. And so I'm going to project this point, and then I'll drag this up and snap to that point. So what I'm doing is I'm doing this cylinder right here. If we revolve a rectangle, we get a cylinder. So I have a couple of different options the way I could have done this. I could have extruded a circle, or I could revolve a rectangle. And so I'm going to revolve a rectangle 0.5 radius for a 1-inch diameter. So notice everything that I've done so far is simple rectangles. I didn't put the line across here, but I could have done this as a rectangle, that is a rectangle, this is a rectangle, this is a rectangle. And in 2000, Inventor 2000, I probably would have done these two as rectangles as well. In fact, even earlier versions, if I had done the rectangle from here to here and then from here up, you know, that would be fewer clicks. 2 clicks for the rectangle, for each rectangle. Let's see if I want to. I think I'm going to. I could put more geometry on this sketch, but I think I'll just leave just this single rectangle on that sketch, and I will turn off the dimension visibility of that one, and then I will think about what I want to do for my next sketch. I have this cylinder. I have a hole within that cylinder, and then I have this groove. Appears to be an O-ring groove here in the back of the part. And again, cylinders, a lot of that is all cylindrical that can be done with rectangles. Okay, so I want to put a cylinder here, a cylindrical feature. So I'm going to start a new sketch, and I'm going to project geometry. I want to project this point just like we did for the other sketches. And that's one thing is, you know, I'm trying to use as few connections as possible, that if I make a change to say sketch 1 or 2, I don't want sketch 3 to break. So I try to, you know, not connect those sketches together too much. Use as few connections as possible. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle from this point and up about like that. And I'm going to change this line to a center line, and we'll see why here in a minute. So this is going to be my cylinder, so I want to put a diametral dimension on that, so that's why the center line. So if I dimension to a center line, not the end point, to the center line and then to this point, I get a diametral dimension. I'm going to do that as 1.375. Okay, and then I want to dimension from this line to the origin. That's my datum, the origin, and that distance is 1.75. So I'm going to end up revolving this to get my cylinder on the front of this. Then inside that cylinder I have a hole, and so I'm going to do some sketching for the hole. And so I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to come down, not as long as this line. I'll come down about like that, and I'll come over, and I'm going to end up putting an angle on this, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back to, now I haven't projected this line to my current sketch, which maybe I should do, but I'm going to click here, and I'll come up to here, and I'll click over to here. Okay, then I want to make sure that this line, that point stays there, and actually it looks like it is going to stay there, but if it didn't, I would I think I put it in the wrong place. Let me undo that for a minute. Okay, so I actually want this to come all the way back to here, so I'll do extend. The hole's got to go all the way through the part, and undo that. I got to remember that I'm in multiple sketches here, and this line is not in this sketch. This is in sketch number 1. I'm just going to delete that, and I'll put it in again. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to draw a line from here up to here and over to there. Now this line I'm going to end up being a construction line, so it might be best so I don't confuse anybody about what's going on if I turn off the visibility of sketch number 1 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to change this line to a construction line, and I don't really have to do that, but I prefer to have that as a construction line. Again, that goes back to the drawing board days where you use a lot of construction lines. And I'm going to put a vertical constraint. Now in 3D, the Z is always vertical, and so I'm going to put a vertical constraint on that line, and I'm then going to delete this line. I put that in the wrong place, and I'm going to come from here back to here, and from there down to here. Okay, so now I have this rectangle is a closed profile. That's going to give me my cylinder, and this then is going to give me my hole, which goes all the way through to the back of the part, and that's why I put it back here to this datum. All right, then I'm going to dimension the diameters. So I'll dimension the diameter of the hole. Remember, pick the center line, and then this line. That'll give you a diametral dimension. And that dimension, and that is actually supposed to be the 1.375, so this is supposed to be 2.25. We'll say that I did this on purpose, right? 2.25, so that I could show you that you can just edit the dimension and change it. Yeah, we'll go with that, if you believe that. Alright, and then I'll double click on this dimension, and I'll change that to 1.375. Okay, that was supposed to be a joke, so hopefully you laughed or chuckled. And then I'm going to dimension the diameter from here to here. Again, pick the center line, and I want that diameter to be 1 inch, and I want the distance from here to this point to be 1.25. Now notice that it changed the angle on this, but I can just drag this back, get it where I wanted it at that angle, and then dimension the angle between here, and I'm going to put that in at 60 degrees for a total included angle when I revolve that hole of 120 degrees. Turn off the dimension visibility. So this is giving me my cylinder, and then this will give me the hole that goes all the way through the part when I revolve this. So I'll revolve this to get the cylinder, I'll revolve this with cut to get the hole. Okay, let's think about what we're going to do for the next sketch for the next feature. Look at the back of this part. I have this O-ring groove cut in here. That can be done with the revolved rectangle, and I think I'll do that. I'll just add that to this same sketch. So let me edit this sketch, and while I'm at it, let's go ahead and change this line to a center line, and then I'm going to draw. Remember earlier, it's kind of hard to see here, I put this construction line in here, and so I'm going to draw a rectangle somewhere on this construction line, but not at the midpoint, unless that's where it is supposed to be. But I'm going to draw a rectangle about like this. I'm doing that for this slot back here, and I'm going to dimension then, so the inside diameter on that slot is 3.5, and then the outside diameter of the slot is 4 inches, and then the depth of the slot will be 5 divided by 16 IN. Make sure you have the IN in. I make sure I put the divisor in there. 5 divided by 16 IN for the units, and it'll show that then as a fractional. If I don't put in that units, it will convert it to decimal inches. Sometimes what I do though is I put only on my sketches, I put only geometry that's going to add, hit physical geometry, and then on a separate sketch I put the geometry that's going to do the cuts. In this case, I'm kind of mixing. I have an add and a subtract or cut geometry in the same sketch. Alright, so I've turned off the visibility of that. I'll save the file, and I'll decide what I'm going to do then for my next feature. I have 3 holes here that are on this back datum. Remember, bottom datum, my back datum, and so I'm going to go ahead and do it. Now there's a lot of different ways I could do those holes. This is just one way. So if I go to the front view, or if I look at it from the back view, I'm going to draw a circle at the center of that hole, and so I'm going to go to appropriate plane. I'll do a new sketch, and then I want to project geometry. This is the important thing. I want to project geometry. This point, that's the center of the cylinder. I want to project that point to the center of the cylinder. Now actually I just projected sketch number 3 or whatever. I'm going to undo that. I'm trying to make everything only dependent on sketch 1 if possible. So if I turn on the visibility of sketch 1 and I'll turn off the visibility of sketch 3, if I project this point, then I only have one place where it could, what I call going sick. If I have caused some kind of problem, I only have one place to fix it, and that was back in sketch number 1. So I'm going to then draw a circle at that location, and I will go ahead and dimension that circle 2.75. Notice it turns dark, that it's all fully constrained. And then I'm going to draw a vertical line. I might come up here from the 12 o'clock position down to this point, and then over horizontally, and then I'm going to do it again over here on that side. Okay, and now this one I noticed didn't change color, so I didn't get the horizontal on there, and so I'll do a horizontal constraint on this line, or I could have done perpendicular between here and here, or collinear between here and here. Now I'm going to change all of this to construction, and then I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to select all of this geometry, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on center point. Now when I do that, it puts center point here, here, here. It also puts center point here, which I don't want, so I'll select that again, and I'll click center point again, so that puts it back to a sketch point rather than a center point. The reason I do that, we'll see later on, is the hole command automatically picks up center points, and so that was an easy way of doing that. Alright, I'll finish sketch. I'll turn off the dimension visibility. I think that's everything that can be done based off of the origin planes. And except for sketch number 4, I did everything off of one origin plane. If I turn on the visibility of this other sketches, and so I have this geometry based on that origin plane, and then this geometry based on that origin plane. And in fact, if I go back and turn on the dimensions, I'll turn on all the dimension visibility. Now it's a little bit confusing with all of the dimensions turned on here, but notice I have access to all of my dimensions. So in the real world, you typically have to make changes to your geometry. I can go through here and I can double click on any of these dimensions and change that dimension as needed to whatever dimension I want to edit. And so I have all of my dimension available here. Okay, so I'm going to start creating some geometry now, because everything else, these two holes are based on this plane, these four holes are based on this plane, there's a hole here, here, and on the other side. Those are all based on other than the origin geometry. So I'm going to drag my end apart marker up so only sketch number 1 is visible. Now, we could do what we're doing I'm going to do next. I'm going to use sketch 1. So I could have done that, and for a beginner, the easy way is then to create sketch 2 and use it, then to create sketch 3. But I went ahead and created all my sketches in advance. That's kind of a pro way of doing it, not necessarily a beginner way. That again, I come from the drawing board, where in the drawing board, and in fact, let's look at one other thing here, which I forgot about this. If I go to this view and I tell it to show this shaded with hidden edges, or maybe it'd be better to show it as wireframe with hidden edges. And so let's go wireframe with hidden edges. Okay, so really what I have done, if we ignore the Phillips in here, is on my sketch, I have sketched, this rectangle, this L shape, this rectangle for this. So that's really what I did, is a 2D drawing board drawing to lay out my sketches. Alright, so we'll go back where we were. And so let me drag this back up so only sketch number 1 is visible. And I'm going to start creating solid geometry. So I'll, again, you could have only had just this sketch or created only this sketch. I'll do an extrusion, and I'm going to do extrusion of this distance times 2. And I want to go symmetrical about the origin. So that's one thing we might do different in the CAD program, is use that symmetry about the origin, which on the milling machine, I put a datum on one side or the other. And so I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And I want to reuse that sketch. So I'll turn the visibility of that sketch back on. And then I want to extrude this rib. And I want it to go the same distance, or what I could do is I could tell it to go between this face and this face. So if I change the distance of extrusion 1, this one will always follow it. So that might be a better way of doing that extrusion. I'm going to extrude this rectangle, and I'm going to go mid-plane on that, and I'll do that as a distance of 0.5. Okay. And then I'm going to turn off the visibility of sketch number 1. Notice it has a hand symbol on here. That hand symbol means that sketch is shared by multiple features. So actually that sketch is shared by three features right now. Now what I want to do is I want to make this cylinder. So I'm going to drag the end apart marker down, and that reveals this sketch. And I really intended to make this a center line. It doesn't really matter, but let's go ahead and do a revolve. The reason I do that as a center line is so that it reminds me that that's going to be a revolve feature. I can still pick that as the axis of revolution, and I'll say OK to that to join that. And I'll drag my end apart marker down to the next sketch. And again, this was the cylinder that's going to go around, and so I'll do a revolve, and I'll pick this area, and I'll revolve around the axis. Now when I did that, I had 2 areas that were selected in that revolve, and let's look. So I need to get only one side of that axis. And so I'm going to go back to profile, and I'm going to control unselect this, and I want to get only the upper portion of this. Now in the new version of Inventor 2020, it's really easy to get just the portion of that profile that you want. And in earlier versions, though, it can be difficult to select either this area or this area. and I'm having a lot of trouble trying to get just this area up here. So that might be a good reason to do this as multiple sketches rather than one sketch. Let me see if I can find a way. I'll show you a trick, hopefully that it will work with this. I'm going to edit this sketch, and I'm going to put a sketch point at this location right here, and I think there's already one here, but I'm going to put one there as well. And I'm hoping that will help me select just this area by putting those sketch points in there. The other thing I want to do is make sure that I have this as one line, I have this as a different line for a boundary. So that's a line. So I'm trying to make sure I have a boundary of just that area. Alright, I'll try to do this revolve again, and again it's giving me trouble picking. I can pick this area no problem, but I'm having trouble picking just this area up here. Right, let me show you a second little trick. So that putting the point there, whoa, I had it there for a second. I keep getting it, and there, I got it. All right, I was going to show you a second little trick, and I'm not going to, I'll just explain it. I won't actually do it. A second little trick, though, is I could have changed any one of these boundary edges to a construction line, did my revolve, because now it only has one closed boundary, and then change it back from construction line to an object line. But I didn't have to do it, so I'll just leave it the way it is. All right, so I'm going to do that revolve as a cylinder. Now we might be tempted to go ahead and put the hole in the part now, but what I prefer to do is to model this in a similar way to the way I would manufacture it out on the shop floor. So I get all of my solid geometry first, and then I go back and I cut away making the cuts that I would make out on the shop floor. And so that's what I'm going to do in this case. And so I'm ready to put some fillets on this. And now putting fillets on a part can be maddening. Sometimes until you get a lot of experience, you just have to be willing to try different techniques. Maybe I shouldn't say techniques so much as different orders of putting the fillets in. Now there's one that's real obvious, and that is this large fillet that goes across there. So right now this has a planar top on it. So I'm going to do a fillet, and rather than put in a radius, I'll tell it to do a full round fillet. And so it asks me for a side face. This is the first side. Then it asks me for a center face, and then it asks me to select a second side. By doing that, no matter what I change the width of this part to, that fillet will always update to go all the way across there and give me the correct fillet. Alright, then I want to fillet this corner and this corner down here. So I'll select one of those corners, I'll select the fillet command, I'll come over and also select this edge, and I'm going to make that fillet 13/16. So I'll do 13 divided by 16 IN, and I've put in that fillet. And then I have to start making some decisions about the orders in which to put the remaining fillets. And that can, it's really based on a lot of experience. So I'm going to go through and I'll put the fillets in, and some 0.25 fillets that go in here. Let's do those larger fillets first. So I'll do a fillet 0.25. And actually I'm going to, there was a what I call edit pencil up here. I clicked on the edit pencil when I changed that dimension to get it back to the selection cursor. Hopefully I'll remember to show that again on a future fillet. So I want to fillet around this edge, 0.25. Then I want to do the fillet along this edge, and along this edge, and along this edge, and this edge, this edge, and this edge. Okay, so those are all 0.25. I'll say OK to that, or I could say apply. Let's go ahead and just say apply. and then I want to change my next fillet. So notice that selection change to edit pencil. I'm going to do 0.125, and then to get my selection tool back, I'll click here on the edit pencil. Now I can go through and select geometry. You know, based on prior experience, see, I want a fillet to kind of go all the way around here, and so before I do that though, so I'm going to select this edge. I'll select this edge. I'm going to select this edge, this one, and this one. Also this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay, so I have those fillets in, so that's going to allow that fillet to go all the way around that edge. And then I'm going to select this edge, and I'll select that edge, so the fillet will come along here. It'll go around this edge, and I'm going to go ahead and finish this rib is kind of by itself. It's isolated by itself, so I'll select this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge right here. Alright, so I like how that's looking. Now I didn't pick this edge, I didn't pick this one, I didn't pick this edge. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and so those all solved OK. I may try to add a fillet along this edge, so I'll go back and I'll edit that feature. I'm going to put it on loop, and I'm going to, actually it's trying to go around that loop. I don't want it, so I'll put it back on the edge, and if I go around here, and notice I'm having to pick each one of those edges, so I'm going to cancel out of that. If I add it as another fillet feature, there's fewer picks, so now I only need to pick it one time, and it goes all the way around that with just one pick. And then I need a fillet in here, and I need a fillet in here. I'll say OK to that. So it's just a little trick to reduce the number. I didn't have to go around and pick each one of these edges if I separate those fillets. I think we have all the solid geometry. We're ready to start cutting the part. Remember back earlier on the sketch 3, I had the geometry for the hole. If I turn on the visibility of that sketch, and I do a revolve, and I want just the bottom portion of this, and remember before I had a hard time getting the top, now I'm having a hard time getting only the bottom area. And again, the new version, Inventor 2020, that is much improved. And so I got it, and so I'm going to do a revolve, and I'll tell it to do a cut, and so I put the cut. Let's turn off the visibility of the sketch. Now there's a second hole in here, a tapped hole, and I will go ahead and put in that tapped hole. So I'm going to do a hole feature, and I'm going to select this face, the cylindrical reference. It moves it to the center, and I'll put this on a threaded instead of tapped hole. The size I want to do 1.5, and 1.5 16 UN, Unified National. And then for the depth of this, I don't want it to go through all, so I'm going to click here for distance, and I'm going to tell full depth, and then the depth of this hole I'm going to do as 0.875. Okay, now I like to put break the sharp edge on here too, so I'm going to put a chamfer on here. So let's do countersink, and I could do the chamfer after the fact. I'm going to do countersink 1.5. I'll put that on there now. Okay, so I put broke that sharp edge to help the fastener go in here, and then the thread. But I'm just going to go ahead and do the sketch on this face. And I'm going to project geometry. Now I could project this circle to find the center location, but again I prefer to project from sketch number 1, and so I'm going to turn on the visibility of sketch 1. I will project geometry that center line, and then turn off the visibility of that sketch. So that's only tied to sketch number 1. It isn't tied to this geometry. So if I make a change, it's less likely to fail. And so I'm going to draw a circle here at the origin, and I'm going to draw a center point rectangle here at the going out to the edge of this, and I'm going to make the vertical side equal to the horizontal side, so that will be square. Right? I'm going to then dimension this circle 4.625, and then I'm going to use that trick that we used earlier. So I'm going to actually change all that. I prefer to do that as construction, although we don't really need to. And then I'm going to select this area, and I'm going to click here to put those 4 points in, but it also gets this points what I don't want, so I'll select that and I'll click here again. So I don't know, you could click on point 1, 2, 3, 4, or I don't know which one is more picks. I just prefer to do it that way. Alright, I'll finish that sketch, and then I'm going to do a hole again. Inventor automatically picks up those 4 center points. I'm going to tell I want a spot face hole. The diameter of my spot face is 1730 seconds. And the depth 0.0625, the drill diameter, and I got the dimensions wrong. I'll go ahead and put this in 17 divided by 32 IN. Now notice it's red. It's saying I can't have both of those conditions the same. This one was supposed to be 1 inch. And so now it turns black, so I have that as 1 inch. These holes at 1730 seconds. The depth is 16th, and I'll say okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. And I realized that I made a mistake earlier when I did this. So this fillet right here is larger on this one. So I need to go back and edit some of those fillets. I'm going to drag down the part marker up, and so this was the first fillet, and then I put in that fillet, and then I did this fillet, and I needed to add that line and that line. So I'm going to edit that feature, and I'm going to select this line and this line. Now when I pull this down one more step, it's going to give me an error because that edge and that edge is now gone. So I'll drag that down, and actually it didn't give me an error. I was expecting it to actually give me an error. It didn't. And if it had given me an error, I would have gone and edited this one first, held the control key down to unselect that edge, and then bring it down. Okay, so I have that fillet, and so now I can bring that down. So the next step is something we have to be really careful of. And actually I've got error in this sketch now. Let me edit that sketch. And it's showing me an iron and a circle for an error, probably because of this face, and because I changed when I put that fillet in, I changed that face. And you know what, I think what I need to do is I was actually surprised that it didn't return an error earlier, so I'm going to undo back to before I change that fillet. So I went back, and I'm going to then, so these are the kind of things, you know, that happen to you that you've got to watch out for. So I'm going to edit this fillet, and I'm going to control unselect this edge and this edge. Okay, I will go back up to this fillet, and I'm going to add those 2 edges to that fillet. Right, then we'll drag this back down and hope that it takes care of that problem with that 6 sketch. In this case, it's still showing that sketch as 6, And so let's try this. I'm going to right click and I'm going to redefine that sketch, and I'm going to click this face again. I picked any of these 4 faces. I'm going to pick this face again, and that took care of the problem. So by having those fillets in there, when I put them in the wrong order, it lost the reference to that face, and so I had to redefine it. That's the kind of thing that happens when you are not using the Born technique. So these were not based on the origin planes, these 4 holes, and I run into a problem with the sketch not being robust, because that I had to abandon the Born technique for that particular sketch. Now we got to be real careful when we do this. When I zoom in here, notice there's a little flat going across here, and there's a little flat going across here, and there could have been up here too, although I think there's a tangent. It might be a slight little flat there and there, because we did this hole from this face, but actually it comes around and it's bigger than that countersink, on the fillet. So what we need to do is go to that feature, and we'll say edit feature. I'll edit that feature, and I'm going to do this. Let's zoom in here where we can see one of those holes. Okay, so watching that little place right there, I'll do the extend start, and I'll say okay. Now notice that it cut that out. So watch when you have a hole like this that intersects a fillet that adds material to the part, that you get that cut away. Alright, now I have some holes that that go around here on the back side of this. So I'm going to cut the O-ring groove first. So I'm going to drag the end of part marker down. And actually, so there's for the holes. Let's go ahead and put those holes in now. I think we'll cut the O-ring groove last. So I'll go ahead and I will do those holes. And so I want those to be drilled holes. I'm going to uncheck these conditions, and I want that to be a drilled hole, and it's got the 3 points selected. The diameters of those holes are 7/16, and for the depth of those holes, I want them to go. I don't want them to go through all, so I'll put in a depth, and the depth 0.836. I'm not sure where that number came from, but I'm following along from the existing part, and so I'm using this part as my reference. Now notice the hole is going the wrong direction, so I need to flip that hole to the other direction. So here under direction, I'll flip that so that it's going in that direction. I'll say OK to that, and so I have those 3 holes. And so what I'm doing, I'm grouping all of my holes together here. That's why I decided to do the O-ring last. Although we could just drag the end of part marker up and go ahead and put in that O-ring now, which that was sketch number 3. I'll turn on the visibility of that, and I'll do my revolve of this rectangle about this axis. I'll put it on cut. I'll say OK to that. Turn off the visibility of sketch number 3. If we can go back down to where we were, I'll drag the end up. So I can change history by just dragging the end of part marker up or down and put features in the location where I want them, in the order that I want them. And I think I'll do these 2 holes, and then I'll do the 3 holes on the outside last. So these 2 holes are going to be on this face. So that's that isn't exactly the Born technique when we use a part face, but in this case it makes sense to do it. So I'm going to draw a line to keep those 2 holes centered up this way, and I'll draw a line down here horizontally, and I'll put a coincident constraint between the midpoint of this line and the end of that line, and then I will put my dimensions on here, and let's just go ahead and drag this back here, and I'll put my dimensions on. This width, the distance between centers of those holes, 4.25, and then the distance from here back to the origin. I want to get that. I'm trying to get that origin point rather than the edge of the part. Actually, I can get this point, and that distance then 1.875. Okay, and again, I like to change those to construction, but it's really not necessary. But I'll right-click, change that to construction, and I'll put a sketch point here and a sketch point there. I will finish sketch. I'll do my whole feature. And maybe I should have done the counterboards, you know, back to back, or the spot face. I'll do a spot face. The spot face on this one is 1.0625. Or 1.0625. The depth 0.0625, and the drill diameter 2130 seconds. 21 divided by 32, and I'll say OK to that. And so I have those two. Now I didn't make sure that I had that going through all, so let's make sure. I will edit feature and make sure that's set to go through all. One of the things you might have noticed is that over here in my browser, it's given me a list of the distances that I gave, and that isn't the default for Inventor. Let me show you how I turn that on. So if I go to Tools, Application Options, and on the Part tab, I've set Display Extended Information after Feature Node in the browser. So as I create a feature, it gives me this extended information that I find really useful. If you ever take the Inventor Certified Professional exam, first thing you should do is, or one of many first things you should do before you even start the exam, is turn on that extended information. It will help you answer the questions a lot faster on the exam. Okay, so now I need to put a hole here, here, and over here. So I'm going to put one hole over here and then do a circular pattern of that hole. So I'm going to do a sketch on this face, and then I'm going to draw some lines to locate that hole, and so I'm going to draw a line that goes up and over. One thing that I've done also is back in the application options is I turned off auto project. I guess I better show that as well. On the sketch tab, there's some auto project tools that I turn those off. I only project exactly what I want to project, and then but I do want the origin to always be projected, so I'll project the part origin, and then I like to show this sketch display all the way up to here. I also turn off these axes and grid lines, and so those are just preferences that I have. And so now I'm going to put some dimensions on here, and so let's go back to the sketch tab, and I'll put some dimensions on here so from here over to this line. And now I actually want to make sure that I get that line and not the edge of the part. So you know, sometimes what I'll do is I'll turn off the visibility of the part temporarily to make sure that I don't get the edge of the part when I'm putting that dimension in, because I want it to be as robust as possible if I make any changes. Actually, while I'm doing that, let's go ahead and put in this height as well, and I can just accept whatever it is now. But one thing is, if you just accept a dimension like that, make sure that you go back and edit it. I see a lot of times that somebody will forget to put that, and you know, I thought about it, and I really don't want, you know, this hole is lined up with the center of this, so I'm not going to put in that dimension. I'll put in this dimension, 0.625, and I've already put in that height in sketch number 1. So let's go back, turn on the visibility of sketch 1, and I'll project geometry this point that was, controls all this cylindrical stuff. I'll select that point, and then that will, now everything is controlled from that sketch number 1. There's the point. I'll drag this up, drop it on there. It all turns dark. I like to change that to construction, and then I'm going to put a point on here. And actually, this one, remember, is I don't want that as a center point, or it'll try to put a hole there. I just want it as a sketch point, and then I'll put a center point on this one. Okay, I will then do the hole feature. So I'll go to do a hole, and I want this one to be the tapered tapped hole. I don't want it to go through all, so I'll put in here for distance. I want this to be an NPT, National Pipe Thread, and I'm going to do that as a 1/4 18, 1/4 18, and for the depth of this, I want it to be 1.875. And then Inventor will choose an appropriate depth for the pipe tap. You could override that if you needed to, but in general you should accept the default. And I also like to break the sharp edge on that, and so I'm going to do a countersink on this. And now pipe tap, that 1/4 is not 1/4 of an inch. It's a nominal specification, and I'm going to guess 0.5, and you can just look at it visually and see if that looks appropriate, and that looks pretty good to me. And I'll say okay to that, so I broke that sharp edge on that. And then I'll do a circular pattern. I'll select this feature. I want to pattern it about this hole. I'll pick the cylinder out here. About that cylinder, I want 3 copies in 180 degrees, and it's previewing going around this way. I want to go the opposite direction, so I'll flip that rotation so that previews here and over here. Now, one thing you have to be careful, in some cases you may need to expand this and select this adjust rather than identical, or it might not come out right. In fact, I think it's not going to come out right. See this? Let's go ahead and accept it now so you can see this. I'll go ahead and say okay to that. Well, it did come out okay in this instance, but to be safe, if you click that adjust, you're less likely to have it not come out correctly, because it's going to try to cut the same material here over on this side, but actually, see, this one is it's the opposite side, and we're revolving around in this direction. I think that completes everything on our part. One thing I like to do is make something look aesthetically pleasing. So if this is cast iron, let's go ahead and select our material. Now keep in mind that this is material here. Think of this like paint over here. So you could have something that's wood but painted gold. You don't want to. It isn't material gold. Don't sell it as gold. So let's do this as cast iron. And maybe I want these machine surfaces to show up, better, or more like machine surface. So if I go to the properties of that, and I could select maybe make it look, any one of the machine surfaces, but I'm gonna pick make it look chrome, because remember, this isn't material now, this is appearance. I'm going to make it look like polished chrome. And now that's kind of dark, it's hard to see it, but it looks more like it's machined. And you can do that by face, by feature. So for the holes we could change, or we could come up here, I could click here to adjust. I get this eyedropper, I can pick up that color with the eyedropper, and now I get a paint bucket. I could drop it on this face down here, hold down the control key, select that face, and go around and get all of the machine faces and give them a lighter color to make it look aesthetically pleasing. Let's do at least one of the holes here. So by doing it by feature, so if I go to properties of the feature, and I'll set that to that chrome polished, and I like the way that looks, so I'm gonna do the next one. And so let's do this one. So I'll go to properties, and I'll do that chrome polished. You know, and I had that, this was a revolve up there that I did earlier. So I'll go to the properties of that revolve, and I'm going to change that to chrome polished. Oops, wrong one. That was the outside revolve, so I don't want to do the outside revolve. I need to find the cut revolve, so I'll go to the properties of that and change that one to the chrome polished. Alright, so that gets that back in there. I should have gotten this face. I need to get those holes. Let's just go ahead and get this one. This one is so easy to do. I'll get that one. This one you could do as a feature, or you could do, you know, just 3 picks to go ahead and click that. And so I've got those. So that's all in aesthetics of making it look aesthetically pleasing once we've completed our part. And then if we need to make any changes, we've done it in a technique that is real robust. We're less likely to cause anything to break, and if we do break anything, it's relatively easy to fix.